Hi, and welcome back to Gaijin 50 Plus. Today I'd like to talk to you about another immigration case. Now before I do, I'd like to first of all stress that this is not an Japanese immigration channel, and I don't want to be known as the Japanese immigration YouTube guy, but it's just the way the things have come out. It's just the way the things have progressed over the past week has led me into some information that I think is very, very important when talking about Japanese immigration policy. Now, in my last video about the Japanese planned crackdown on permanent residents, misbehaving permanent residents, I should stress, there was one commenter among the 142 comments that we received. There were a few from a Japanese person named Tatsumasa 6332 about what exactly does the Japanese Constitution guarantee for foreigners in Japan? According to him, not much. And so there was some give and take. There was no debate, no argument. We discussed a few things back and forth. And at the end, he suggested to me to look into something called the McLean Case. So I had never heard of this. McLean Case, what is this? You know, I'm somebody who's been here as long as I have. I've heard about a lot of different things, but never the McLean Case. So I tracked down the information that I could find, and I was totally fascinated about the case and about how much it still affects today's immigration decisions in Japan, and how much it revealed about Japan's views concerning the protection of the human rights of foreigners who live upon these hallowed shores. So to give you a quick rundown, the McLean case set a landmark precedent in the Japanese Supreme Court, and it defined how far human rights guaranteed by the Japanese Constitution extended to foreign nationals. So it's very important. It all started out when a guy named Ronald McLean got here in 1969 and started to work as an English conversation teacher. At first, he was given a one-year visa to teach English. And during the time in Japan, he also started studying koto and samisen, Japanese traditional musical instruments. And after his one-year visa was up, he applied for an extension of visa, a one-year extension. And so he submitted his paperwork, and immigration denied his one-year extension. Instead, they gave him 120 days, during which they advised him to get his Japanese life in order and prepare it for his departure, because he would not be allowed to stay after the 120 days. Well, not one to give up easily, McLean immediately filed one more time for a one-year extension, which was denied. The government said that the reason that they wouldn't extend his visa is that he had changed employers illegally, without permission and without informing the immigration office. I don't know the way it is now, because I'm a permanent resident. I don't have to deal with this type of thing. But back then, your visa was tied to your employment. And if you changed your employer somewhere along the line, you were supposed to, by law, inform immigration or get their permission ahead of time. And McLean apparently didn't do this. So they said visa denied. He, being a red-blooded American guy, did the red-blooded American thing, and he fired a lawsuit against the Japanese government. So, in the first court case, the Justice Ministry said that they didn't want to extend his visa because of his job change, but they also added a second reason. And this time they said the second reason was his participation in political activities. Now, it seems that McLean was taking part in anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in Japan, and he was also involved in demonstrations against the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty renewal. He was also involved in demonstrations resisting the government's suppression of foreign residents' rights, and various other political activities. Now, I hasten to add that at the beginning of the 1970s, when this all took place, Japan was in a big period of social and political upheaval. It wasn't the peaceful Japanese people put up with anything that you have today. There were demonstrations. If you watch the news back then, the evening news, almost every day there were newsreels of police and demonstrators beating each other over the head. There were all kinds of stories about, people were killed, people were injured. I don't know if you know, but even Narita Airport, I think that was just that time, or maybe a little bit after, Narita Airport was resisted by the people, the farmers who were living there. And there were daily battles with the police. People, again, were killed in protest against Narita Airport. So there was a lot of this going on in Japan. I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that the government was really interested in changing this situation, in suppressing these demonstrations and these actual riots that were going on. And the last thing that they needed on their plate was some gaijin coming in and getting involved with all of this. And so they presented their cases to the Tokyo District Court, I think was the first one. And at first, they ruled in McLean's favor. They said, yep, the government shouldn't have done that. The Tokyo District Court said that the government's action was unfair, unreasonable, and illegal, and that it violated the spirit of the international cooperation and fundamental human rights guaranteed by the Japanese Constitution. So, McLean was pretty happy, except the government appealed to the next Tokyo High Court. And in 1975, they overturned the Tokyo District Court decision, and they said that the Ministry of Justice has free administration discretion on how to enforce the country's immigration laws. And they said at that time, specifically, that political activities can be considered as negative factors when weighing whether a person's visa should be extended or renewed. So McLean's case was dismissed, and he took it to the Japan Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the government. And rather than giving you a summary of what happened, let's look at the actual wording from the Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court said, "The Constitution does not guarantee to foreigners the freedom to enter Japan, nor the right to reside or demand continued residence. The Immigration Control Order authorizes the Minister of Justice to examine, at periodic intervals, a foreign national's circumstances and the necessity and propriety of continued residence, and to decide on renewal at his discretion. Fundamental human rights apply equally to foreigners residing in Japan, except where the nature of the rights makes them applicable only to Japanese nationals, or where, considering the foreigner's status, recognition of such rights would be inappropriate. For example, activities influencing Japan's political decision-making. However, the constitutional guarantees afforded to foreigners exist only within the framework of the immigration control system. It cannot be interpreted that the exercise of such rights is protected from being considered as a negative factor in renewal decisions. Therefore, the minister's decision in this case cannot be deemed unlawful." So with that, McLean left Japan in 1978, leaving us here to deal with the aftermath. And the logic of this decision still shapes how Japan regards and treats foreigners today. And that is why the announcement of the permanent residence crackdown that we talked about last week was presented in terms of guidelines. At the time I was talking about this, I was wondering about this. Guidelines? Guidelines of what? Guidelines for whom? I thought maybe they were guidelines for enacting legislation or something like that. But no, I guess these are guidelines that for immigration authorities, not rules, not guardrails, but guidelines. It's almost like suggestions. The actual final decision about whether a foreigner should be allowed to stay in Japan, remain in Japan, have permanent residence, come into Japan, or be kicked out of Japan seem to lie in the hands of individual immigration authorities with no real recourse in the judicial system. So to wrap it all up, what does all this mean? Well, number one, Gaijins have no constitutional right to enter or remain in Japan. That is by a decision of the Japanese Supreme Court. Number two, the Minister of Justice can freely decide when a Gaijin gets to stay here. Number three, foreigners do have human rights in principle, but only within the framework of the immigration system. Number four, you are allowed to express your opinion as long as you do not influence Japan's political processes or interfere with its public order. In a nutshell, you're allowed to think what you want, but if you act on it in a way that rattles Japanese harmony, you just might get the boot. And that's it from Gaijin 50 Plus this week. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope it helps to put things in perspective when talking about immigration. I plan to put information about the McLean case and a general description of the Supreme Court decision, and I'll put a link up in our show notes where you can check it out. But it's like I said, it's very important, and it's spells out. You know, I had a commenter. Let me mention this. I had one commenter in the last video, and he said, you know, I have a Japanese wife and 3 Japanese children. So basically, I feel like I can do just about anything I want, you know, no matter what it is, and they'll never kick me out of this country because I have a family here. That's not the case necessarily. If you have a immigration official who feels for you, who feels sorry for you, yeah, you might be able to get away with what you want to do. But as a general rule of law, you have no guarantee. They could kick you out of here like that if they want to. As I said, that's it for this week. We'll see you next time.